Hey guys, tonight we journey to the rolling hills of the Eastern Cape, South Africa, to witness the birth and early years of a man who would redefine courage and forgiveness for generations. Nelson Mandela. Imagine the sun rising over thatched roof rondavels, the scent of wood smoke curling into the crisp morning air, the distant, rhythmic lowing of cattle. You're a child here, barefoot on the red earth, learning the ancient ways of the Thembu people, a world of tradition and communal bonds, so very far removed from the stark prison cells and the grand presidential stages that lie unseen in the decades ahead. If you were born into this time and place, with the monumental struggles that lay in wait, you probably wouldn't survive the journey with your spirit or your freedom intact. It demanded an almost superhuman resilience, a depth of character forged in these very landscapes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to see our global snoozing community, a tapestry of night owls and early risers, all tuning in for a drift through history. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in Mvezo, a small village nestled on the banks of the Mbashi River in the district of Umtata, the heartland of the Transkei. The date is July 18th, 1918. It's here, in a traditional mud and thatch rondavel, that a baby boy is born. His given name is Rolilahla. In Xhosa, it literally means pulling the branch of a tree, but its more common colloquial interpretation is troublemaker. His parents must have had some remarkable foresight, or perhaps he just had a particularly mischievous glint in his infant eyes from day one. We'll probably never get the full story on whether he was an actual branch yanker, but the name certainly proved prophetic in terms of shaking the established order. Your father is Gadla Henry Mfakanyiswa, a chief of Mvezo and a respected nobleman of the Thembu people, a man known for his pride and sometimes stubborn adherence to custom. He's a polygamist, as is common, and your mother, Nosekeni Fanny, is his third wife. You are of the Madiba clan, a name that will one day echo around the world, a name of ancient Xhosa royalty. This lineage carries weight, a sense of history woven into the very fabric of your identity. You're not just any village boy. There's a certain expectation, an unspoken inheritance of leadership, however remote it might seem in these early, simple days. Life in Mvezo, however, is about to change drastically for your family. Your father, a man of some influence and a counselor to the Thembu king, finds himself in a dispute with the local white magistrate. Historians still argue whether his father's dispute with the magistrate was primarily over an ox alleged to have been stolen, a simple matter that escalated, or a more profound challenge to colonial authority and its encroachment on traditional leadership. Whatever the specific spark, Gadla's refusal to appear before the magistrate, viewing it as an affront to his status and Xhosa custom, is deemed insubordination. The consequences are swift and severe. He is stripped of his chieftainship, his land, and much of his livestock and wealth. This sudden fall from grace forces your family to relocate. You move from Mvezo, the place of your birth, to the smaller, more isolated village of Qunu, a cluster of huts north of Mvezo, nestled in a narrow, grassy valley. You are perhaps only 2 or 3 years old. Qunu is even more deeply rooted in tradition, less touched by the outside world than Mvezo. Here, your world is shaped by the rhythms of nature and the customs of your people. Your home is a simple kraal, a collection of mud huts where your mother presides over her own household. You live in a hut with your mother. There are no beds, just mats on the earthen floor. There's no running water, no electricity. Such things are luxuries beyond imagination here. Your days are spent like those of other boys in the village. You learn to herd cattle and sheep, a responsibility that instills a quiet patience and watchfulness. You engage in stick fighting with other boys, a pastime that hones your agility and courage. It wasn't exactly Game of Thrones training, more like advanced don't poke your eye out practice, but crucial for developing reflexes and a sense of playful combat. You hunt for birds with a slingshot, gather wild honey and edible roots, and swim in the clear, cool streams. The landscape is your playground, your teacher, your mother. Nosekeni is a devout Methodist, and her quiet faith and strength are a constant presence. She tells you traditional Xhosa folktales, myths, and legends, stories that carry the wisdom and history of your ancestors. These narratives, filled with heroes, tricksters, and moral lessons, subtly shape your understanding of the world, of right and wrong, of courage and cunning. Life is communal. Resources are shared, and there's a strong sense of interconnectedness. Sharing everything probably meant your favorite cowhide blanket was never truly yours for long. But hey, community spirit and the warmth of togetherness more than made up for it. This upbringing instills in you a deep-seated understanding of collective responsibility, a value that will become a cornerstone of your political philosophy. Education, in the formal Western sense, is not a given, but your mother, and later your father from a distance, recognize its importance. When you are about 7 years old, the exact age, like many details from these early years, is recalled with the gentle imprecision of memory. You are sent to the local mission school near Qunu. It's a single-room building, likely whitewashed, standing in stark contrast to the traditional rondavels. On your first day, your teacher, Miss Madingane, gives each student an English name. As was the custom, she names you Nelson. And so, Rolilala, the troublemaker, also becomes Nelson, a name that will one day be synonymous with peace and reconciliation. The irony is delicious, isn't it? One of the most mainstream historical facts about his early life is this: Nelson Mandela was indeed born, Rolihlahla Mandela, on July 18, 1918, in Mvezo. This fact is the bedrock of his biography, the starting point of an extraordinary human journey. Tragedy strikes when you are still a young boy, perhaps 9 or 10 years old, though some accounts suggest you might have been closer to 12. Your father, Gadla, falls ill and dies. The loss is profound. Though he had been stripped of his official position, he remained a significant figure in your life, a man of strong character whose absence leaves a void. Before his death, however, he had made arrangements for your future. He had asked Yongintaba Dalindiebo, the acting regent of the Thembu people, to become your guardian. And so, your life takes another significant turn. You leave the familiar embrace of your mother and the village of Qunu. You travel to Mkhekezweni, the Great Place, the provisional capital of Thembuland and the royal residence of Regent Jongintaba. This is a step up in the world, a move from the periphery to the center of Thembu political and social life. Mkhekezweni is a larger, more bustling homestead with more people, more activity, and a palpable sense of importance. The Regent Jongintaba and his wife, know England, welcome you warmly. You are treated as one of their own children, alongside their son Justice and daughter Nomafu. Life at Mkhekezweni is different. You wear your first pair of trousers, a cast-off from Justice, a small but significant marker of your changing circumstances. You attend a better school, the Clarkberry Boarding Institute, and later Heald Town, a Wesleyan college. Education becomes more structured, more rigorous, but perhaps more importantly, you are now in the household of a powerful leader. You sit in on tribal meetings, often held under the shade of a large tree. You listen intently as the regent and other elders discuss matters of the community, disputes between individuals, issues of land, and the relationship with the distant colonial authorities. You observe how Jongintaba presides, how he listens patiently to all sides, how he seeks consensus, and how he delivers judgments that are respected by the community. These informal lessons in leadership, justice, and governance are invaluable, sinking deep into your consciousness. You learn about the history of the Thembu people, their heroes, their struggles against colonial encroachment. You hear stories of past kings and warriors who resisted the invaders, tales that instill a sense of pride and a nascent awareness of the injustices faced by your people. Jongintaba himself is a powerful influence. He is a stern but fair guardian, instilling in you the values of discipline, respect, and responsibility. He sees potential in you and intends for you to follow a path of service to the Thembu people, perhaps as a counselor to the future king. He doesn't know. Nobody could know. The vastly different, unimaginably larger stage upon which you will one day serve not just the Thembu, but an entire nation, and indeed, inspire a world. Your roots in Qunu, the simple life, the connection to the land, the stories of your mother, the traditions of your people. These are the foundations. Mkhekezweni adds new layers and understanding of leadership, a broader perspective on your heritage, and the beginnings of a formal education that will open up new worlds of thought and possibility. You are still a boy, but the seeds of the man you will become are being sown in the rich soil of these early experiences under the vast African sky. Your time at Mkhekezweni, under the tutelage of Regent Jongintaba, shapes your understanding of leadership and your place within the Thembu tradition. You are being groomed, in a sense, for a life of service within that framework. But destiny, or perhaps that Roli Hlahla spirit we talked about, your given name meaning troublemaker, has other plans. The regent, in his wisdom and adherence to custom, decides it's time for you and his son Justice to marry. He arranges brides for both of you, a decision made with the best intentions to ensure stability and continuity. For you, however, this arranged marriage feels like a constraint, a path chosen for you rather than by you. The prospect of a quiet, circumscribed life, however respectable, suddenly seems stifling. You and Justice, both reluctant bridegrooms-to-be, decide on a radical course of action flight. It's a significant act of rebellion, a departure from the expected obedience. One mainstream historical fact is this: Nelson Mandela moved to Johannesburg in 1941 primarily to escape this arranged marriage. Historians still argue whether Mandela's initial primary motivation for fleeing to Johannesburg was purely to escape the marriage, or if a burgeoning desire for a different, more modern life, and an unformed yearning for broader horizons also played a significant role. So, you and Justice quietly borrow 2 of the regent's horses, or perhaps oxen, accounts vary, and make your escape, heading towards the magnetic allure of Johannesburg, the Igoli, the city of gold. It's 1941. The journey itself is an adventure, fraught with the risk of being caught and returned. But the pull of the unknown, of self-determination, is stronger. Arriving in Johannesburg is like stepping onto a different planet. Gone are the rolling green hills and pastoral tranquility of Qunu and Mkhikezweni. In their place, you're confronted by a sprawling, chaotic, and electrifying urban landscape. The air is thick with the smoke from coal fires and the fine dust from the massive gold mine dumps that loom like man-made mountains, symbols of the city's wealth and the black labor that extracts it. The noise is a constant assault, the roar of trams, the shouts of vendors, the cacophony of multiple languages, and the ever-present hum of industry. Johannesburg in the 1940s wasn't exactly rolling out the welcome mat for young black men, unless that mat led directly to a mine shaft or a cramped back alley dwelling. You find yourself in a world where race dictates every facet of existence, while the formal codified system of apartheid will only be legislated in 1948. The de facto segregation and discrimination are already deeply entrenched, a daily, suffocating reality. You see separate entrances for whites and non-whites in post offices and shops, separate benches in parks, separate queues, separate and vastly inferior amenities. The signs are everywhere. Europeans only. Natives only. It's a constant, blatant reminder of your designated place in the society, at the bottom. This is a far cry from the more nuanced, albeit still colonial, environment of the Transkei, where traditional structures, while eroded, still provided some sense of identity and dignity. Here, in the city, the racial hierarchy is brutal and unambiguous. Your first job is as a night watchman at a gold mine. It's a harsh introduction to the exploitative labor system that powers South Africa's economy. The conditions are grim, the pay meager. You live in a hostel, a crowded, soulless compound. The experience is alienating, a stark contrast to the communal warmth you knew. You don't last long there. Your resume at this point might have read, proficient in cattle herding, stick fighting, and now, expert in looking busy to avoid the wrath of various unimpressed bosses. You soon move to Alexandra Township, a vibrant, overcrowded, and often dangerous black freehold settlement on the outskirts of Johannesburg. Alexandra is a place of stark contrasts, a melting pot of cultures, languages, and aspirations, but also a place of extreme poverty, crime, and squalor. Houses are often shacks made of corrugated iron and scrap wood. Sanitation is rudimentary, and life is a constant struggle for survival. Yet, there's also a defiant energy, a resilience in the face of adversity. You find lodging with a family, crammed into a small room. It's during this period of navigating the bewildering and often hostile environment of Johannesburg that you have a chance encounter that will alter the course of your life. You are introduced to Walter Sisulu, Sisulu is an established figure in the African National Congress ANC, an astute businessman running an estate agency, and a man deeply committed to the struggle against racial discrimination. He sees something in you, perhaps your height and regal bearing, your thoughtful demeanor, or the fire in your eyes. He takes you under his wing, becoming a mentor, a guide, and a lifelong friend and comrade. Sisulu is like a key, unlocking doors you didn't even know existed. He arranges for you to get a job as a clerk at the law firm of Witkin, Seidelsky, and Eidelman, a liberal Jewish-run firm. This is a significant step. It exposes you to the workings of the legal system, even if your tasks are initially menial. Crucially, Walter Sisulu encourages your ambition to study law. He believes that education is a vital weapon in the fight for freedom. You enroll for a Bachelor of Arts degree at the University of South Africa, UNISA, studying by correspondence. Later, you will begin to study law at the University of the Witwatersrand, known as WITS, attending classes part-time. Studying is an uphill battle. You work during the day, attend classes in the evening if you can, and burn the midnight oil pouring over textbooks in your small room in Alexandra, often by candlelight. It's a testament to your growing determination and discipline. The daily experience of racial discrimination is a relentless assault on your dignity. You witness the casual cruelty of the pass laws, which require black men to carry a passbook at all times and produce it on demand by any policeman. Failure to do so means arrest and imprisonment. It was like a never-ending game of Simon Says, except Simon was a very stern policeman. And if you got it wrong, you didn't just sit out the next round. You went to jail. You see black people forced off sidewalks to make way for whites, hear the derogatory terms used to address them, and feel the constant weight of being considered inferior. This is the shock of apartheid, not just the laws, but the lived, breathed, felt reality of it, day in and day out. The stories you heard in Mkekazweni about the injustices of the white man's rule now have a visceral, personal dimension. The experiences in Johannesburg begin to transform your consciousness. Your initial concerns, rooted in Thembu identity and tradition, start to broaden. You begin to see that the plight of the Thembu is part of a much larger struggle, the struggle of all black South Africans against a system designed to dehumanize and dispossess them. The troublemaker spirit, which led you to flee an arranged marriage, is now finding a new, more profound target: the injustice of racial oppression. The seeds of political activism, already present, begin to germinate in the fertile, if harsh, soil of Johannesburg. You are meeting other young, politically aware Africans, engaging in discussions, reading, and learning. The city, with all its brutality, is also a crucible, forging a new kind of leader. Your path is slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, turning towards the fight that will define your life. The raw, unvarnished shock of Johannesburg, with its daily parade of racial indignities and systemic oppression, begins to harden your resolve. The relatively sheltered life in the Transkei, even with its own colonial undertones, hadn't fully prepared you for this relentless assault on human dignity. But you're not one to simply endure. That Rolilala spirit, the one that led you to flee an unwanted marriage, is now channeling itself into a much larger, more formidable rebellion. Your friendship with Walter Sisulu deepens, and his home becomes a hub of intellectual and political activity. It's here, amidst passionate discussions and debates that often stretch late into the night, that you connect with a new generation of young, educated, and increasingly impatient African thinkers and activists. Figures like Oliver Tambo, a brilliant and thoughtful student you meet at Fort Hare University College and later reconnect with in Johannesburg. Anton Lembede, a fiercely intelligent philosopher and lawyer, and Peter Mida, another sharp legal mind, become your comrades and intellectual sparring partners. These aren't just casual acquaintances. They are the architects of a new vision for African resistance. You find yourself drawn to their energy, their articulate anger, and their shared conviction that the time for polite appeals and patient waiting is over. In 1944, you make a formal commitment by joining the African National Congress, ANC. At this point, the ANC is the main political organization for Africans, but it's a relatively conservative body. Founded in 1912, its leadership largely comprises clergymen, traditional chiefs, and educated professionals who favor methods like petitions, deputations to the government, and even to Britain, and resolutions passed at annual conferences. The ANC elders were masters of the strongly worded letter. Unfortunately, the government mostly used them for kindling, if they read them at all. Their approach is cautious, emphasizing respectability and appeals to the conscience of the white rulers. For you and your contemporaries, this approach feels increasingly inadequate, almost anachronistic, in the face of the government's intransigence and the escalating daily humiliations. You see little evidence that such gentle tactics will ever dismantle a system built on racial hierarchy and economic exploitation. A growing sense of frustration, a youthful impatience, and a powerful desire for self-determination begin to simmer within this group. You believe that the ANC needs to be transformed from a relatively small organization of the elite into a dynamic mass movement capable of mobilizing ordinary Africans. This shared vision leads to a pivotal moment, the formation of the ANC Youth League ANCYL in April 1944. This is not just another committee. It's a conscious effort to inject new blood, new ideas, and a new militancy into the parent body. You are a key figure in its establishment, alongside Sisulu, Tambo, Lembede, Mda, Ashby P, Mda no direct relation to Peter but often confused, and others. The Anquil effectively became the classic kids' table, demanding to not just eat with the adults, but to rewrite the entire menu and probably redesign the kitchen too. A mainstream historical fact is that Nelson Mandela, along with Oliver Tambo and Walter Sisulu, was a key figure in the formation of the ANC Youth League in 1944, serving on its executive committee. The intellectual driving force behind the Youth League's ideology is Anton Lembede. He is a brilliant and passionate advocate of what comes to be known as Africanism, or African nationalism. Lembede argues for the inherent worth and dignity of African people, urging a psychological liberation from the colonial mentality of inferiority. He emphasizes African self-reliance, pride in African culture and history, and the rejection of foreign ideologies, whether from the white liberal establishment or the Communist Party, which he felt might dilute the unique focus on African liberation. Lembede could probably philosophize a rock into having an identity crisis. His ideas were that potent, instilling a powerful sense of pride and purpose. Historians still argue whether the ANC Youth League's brand of Africanism, particularly in its early Lembede-influenced phase, was inherently exclusive, or if it was a necessary strategic phase to empower a psychologically colonized people before broader, more inclusive alliances could be effectively formed. Lembede's untimely death in 1947 at the young age of 33 is a severe blow to the Youth League, but his ideas have already taken deep root. The Youth League issues a manifesto, a powerful document that critiques the ANC's past timidity and outlines a new vision for national liberation. It calls for a more assertive and confrontational approach, advocating for tactics such as boycotts, strikes, civil disobedience, and other forms of mass action. The League argues that Africans must be the agents of their own liberation. You, with your commanding presence and growing skills as an orator and organizer, become a prominent voice within the ANCIL, passionately advocating for its policies. You're no longer just pulling branches off trees, as your name Rolilala humorously implied in your childhood. You're now actively trying to uproot the entire rotten system of racial segregation. The Youth League's ideas inevitably create tension within the broader ANC. The older generation, led by figures like Dr. A.B. Zuma, the ANC President General, is wary of the League's radicalism, fearing it could provoke greater government repression or alienate potential white allies. There are heated debates and internal struggles as the young lions of the Youth League push for the adoption of their program of action. Your legal studies, which you continue diligently, provide you with a framework for logical argument and disciplined thinking, skills that prove invaluable in these political battles. You are learning to be both a firebrand and a strategist. Then, in 1948, a political earthquake shakes South Africa. The Herenigde Nasionale Party, Reunited National Party, campaigning on a platform of apartheid, a new, more systematic, and ideologically driven form of racial segregation and white supremacy, wins the general election. This is a watershed moment. Any lingering hopes that the white government might gradually move towards a more inclusive society are shattered. The National Party's victory is a stark confirmation of the Youth League's warnings and intensifies the urgency of the struggle. It was like the universe itself decided to underscore the ANCIL's point, saying, "You thought it was bad before hold my beer." The era of formalized, institutionalized apartheid is about to begin, and the fight for freedom enters a new, more dangerous phase. For you and the ANC Youth League, this is a call to arms, a signal that the struggle must escalate. The fire you helped ignite is about to be tested in the crucible of a far more oppressive regime. The National Party's victory in 1948 and the subsequent, chillingly systematic implementation of apartheid laws cast a long, dark shadow over South Africa. The theoretical discussions and passionate debates within the ANC Youth League now face the grim reality of a government ideologically committed to white supremacy and the total subjugation of the African majority. Laws like the Population Registration Act, which codified every individual by race, the Group Areas Act, which enforced segregated living spaces, and the Suppression of Communism Act, a draconian piece of legislation used to crush any form of dissent, not just actual communism, begin to bite deep into the fabric of society. It's clear that the old ways of polite petitioning are utterly futile against such a regime. The seeds planted by the Youth League, however, are beginning to bear fruit within the broader ANC. In December 1949, at its national conference, the ANC formally adopts the program of action championed by the Youth League. This is a monumental shift, a clear signal that the organization is ready to move beyond mere resolutions and embrace more direct, confrontational forms of struggle. You and your colleagues in the ANCYL see this as a crucial victory, a vindication of your efforts to transform the ANC into a fighting force. With the program of action as its mandate, the ANC leadership, now with a stronger contingent of youth leaguers, including yourself in influential positions, begins to plan its first major national campaign based on these new principles. The idea of a large-scale, coordinated campaign of civil disobedience against specific unjust laws starts to take shape. This isn't a spontaneous outburst. It's a carefully strategized undertaking. The planning is meticulous. A joint planning council is formed between the ANC and the South African Indian Congress SAIC, an organization with a long history of passive resistance. Deeply influenced by Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy of satyagraha developed during his years in South Africa, this alliance is critical, demonstrating a united front among different oppressed groups. Key figures in the SAIC, like Dr. Yusuf Dadoo and Dr. Yusuf Kachalia, work closely with the ANC leadership. 6 specific laws are targeted for defiance: the Pass Laws, the Group Areas Act, the Bantu Authorities Act, which aim to re-tribalize Africans and bolster compliant chiefs, the Separate Representation of Voters Act, which sought to remove colored voters from the common roll, stock limitation regulations which hurt rural communities, and the ever-present Suppression of Communism Act. The government had so many unjust laws. Choosing just 6 was like being a kid in a candy store of terrible legislation. Except, of course, none of it was sweet. Your dedication, organizational skills, and powerful oratory have not gone unnoticed. You are appointed as the National Volunteer-in-Chief for the upcoming campaign, a position of immense responsibility. Your counterpart from the SAIC is Yusuf Kachalia. Your new title, Volunteer-in-Chief, sounded very grand. It mostly meant you were chief organizer of getting arrested peacefully, which, as it turned out, was a surprisingly complex and demanding job. You travel the country, addressing meetings, inspiring volunteers, and ensuring the campaign's codes of nonviolence and discipline are understood and adhered to. The Defiance Campaign Against Unjust Laws is officially launched on June 26, 1952. This date is chosen for its historical significance, marking the anniversary of the 1950 Day of Protest. The mechanics of the campaign are straightforward, yet powerful groups of trained volunteers, under clear leadership, would deliberately and openly break the selected apartheid laws. They would enter Europeans-only sections of post offices, railway stations, and other public places, defy curfew regulations, burn their hated passbooks, those internal passports that controlled the movement of every black South African man, and court arrest. The core principle is nonviolence. Volunteers are instructed not to resist arrest and to maintain a dignified, disciplined demeanor, even in the face of provocation. You don't just direct from an office, you lead by example. In the early days of the campaign, you, along with Walter Sisulu and other leaders, deliberately defy a curfew in Johannesburg and are arrested. You spend a couple of nights in jail. This act of personal participation is crucial for morale and demonstrates to the thousands of volunteers that their leaders are willing to share the same risks and sacrifices. It's about leading from the front, not from some distant, comfortable perch. The response from ordinary South Africans is overwhelming. Thousands upon thousands of people from all walks of life, workers, students, professionals, men and women, step forward to join the ranks of defiers. The campaign spreads from the major cities to smaller towns and even some rural areas. Groups of volunteers, often dressed in ANC colors, would march peacefully to their designated targets, sing freedom songs, and then perform their act of defiance, awaiting the inevitable arrival of the police. ANC membership skyrockets, transforming it from a relatively small organization into a genuine mass movement. It was like the ANC suddenly became the it club everyone wanted to join. Only the membership fee was potential jail time and a police record. The government, headed by Prime Minister D.F. Malan, is initially caught off guard by the scale and discipline of the campaign but soon reacts with predictable brutality. Over 8,500 volunteers are arrested and imprisoned by the end of the campaign, including you again, for a longer period this time, resulting in a suspended sentence. The state introduces even harsher legislation to try and crush the movement, such as the Public Safety Act and the Criminal Law Amendment Act, which impose severe penalties, including floggings and long prison sentences, for acts of protest. The government's response to peaceful protest was to pass even angrier laws. It was as if they believed the fundamental problem was simply a lack of sufficient paperwork to formalize their oppression. Despite not achieving its stated goal of forcing the repeal of the unjust laws, the Defiance campaign is a profound success in other ways. It massively raises the political consciousness of Black South Africans and instills a new sense of empowerment and national unity. It strengthens the alliance between the ANC and the SAIC, laying the groundwork for future multiracial cooperation. The campaign also garners significant international attention and condemnation of apartheid, placing South Africa's racial policies firmly on the world stage for the first time. However, by early 1953, the escalating government repression, the mass arrests, and the severe new penalties make it increasingly difficult to sustain the campaign without risking widespread violence or the complete crushing of the ANC's leadership and organizational structures. The leadership makes the difficult decision to call off the campaign. Historians still argue whether the decision to call off the Defiance campaign in early 1953 was a strategic retreat that wisely preserved the movement's core and allowed for regrouping, or if it was a premature end that unfortunately blunted the momentum of a powerful mass uprising. For you personally, the Defiance campaign marks you as a key enemy of the state. Remember that troublemaker name, Rolihlahla. From your childhood, the government was definitely taking extensive notes and saw you as a primary instigator. Soon after the campaign, you, along with other leaders, are charged and convicted under the Suppression of Communism Act for your role in the campaign, not for being a communist. You receive a 9-month suspended sentence and, crucially, your first banning order. These orders severely restrict your movements, confining you to Johannesburg, prohibiting you from attending gatherings, which means any meeting of more than 2 people, and making it illegal for your words to be published. The state is trying to silence you, to isolate you, to make you invisible. But the spirit of defiance, now deeply embedded in both you and the movement, is not so easily extinguished. The banning orders imposed after the Defiance campaign are designed to cripple your ability to lead, confined to Johannesburg, forbidden from attending any gatherings which the government delightfully defined as more than 2 people, and with your words banned from publication. You are effectively a ghost in your own political machine. Your social life became incredibly exclusive. Meetings of more than 2 people were out, so planning major political strategy often had to be done in very, very small and incredibly discreet huddles or through intermediaries. Yet, you adapt. You learn to operate from the shadows, to communicate through trusted channels, to guide and inspire even when physically absent. The skills you honed as a lawyer, analyzing texts and crafting arguments, are now turned to dissecting government orders and finding loopholes. however small. Despite the intense repression and your personal restrictions, the 1950s see a continuation of resistance, largely non-violent. The ANC, along with its allies in the Congress Alliance, which included the South African Indian Congress, the Colored People's Congress, and the White Congress of Democrats, organizes major initiatives. The most significant of these is the Congress of the People in 1955, held in Kliptown. Though you are banned and cannot attend, you are deeply involved in its conceptualization. Thousands of delegates from across the country gather to draft the Freedom Charter, a visionary document outlining a non-racial democratic future for South Africa. It famously declares, "South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white." Other campaigns continue bus boycotts, like the successful Alexandra bus boycott of 1957, which forced the authorities to rescind a fare increase. Protests against the Bantu Education Act, a policy designed to provide black children with an inferior education suited only for manual labor, and fierce resistance to the extension of pass laws to African women, a move that sparks massive demonstrations. However, the broad church of the ANC also experiences internal strains. A more radical Africanist faction, impatient with the multiracial approach of the Freedom Charter and arguing that the ANC is too influenced by white communists and liberals, breaks away in 1959 to form the Pan-Africanist Congress PAC under the leadership of Robert Sobukwe. It was like a band splitting up because one group wanted to play louder, more exclusively African rock and roll, and the other preferred a more orchestrated symphony of resistance involving various sections of society. Both wanted the same ultimate gig, freedom. They just had different ideas on the set list and who should be on stage. The PAC is determined to prove its mettle and launches its own national anti-pass campaign in March 1960. The plan is for protesters to present themselves at police stations without their passes, inviting arrest to clog the system. On March 21, 1960, a large crowd of such protesters gathers outside the police station in the township of Sharpeville, near Vereeniging. The exact sequence of events is still debated in some minor details, but the outcome is horrifically clear. Without warning, the police open fire on the unarmed and, by most accounts, peaceful crowd. They continue firing as people turn to flee. A mainstream historical fact that shocked the world is this: the Sharpeville massacre occurred on March 21, 1960, when South African police opened fire on unarmed anti-pass protesters, killing 69 people. Many were shot in the back. Over 180 others were wounded. The blood spilled at Sharpeville sends a tremor of shock and revulsion across South Africa and around the globe. It is a brutal, undeniable demonstration of the state's willingness to use lethal force against unarmed civilians. The government responds not with introspection or reform, but with even greater repression. A state of emergency is declared. The ANC and the PAC are officially banned in April 1960. Thousands of activists are arrested and detained without trial. For you, and for many within the ANC leadership now forced completely underground. Sharpeville is the ultimate turning point. Decades of peaceful protest, of petitions, of defiance campaigns like the one you led, remember that commitment to nonviolent discipline had been met not with negotiation, but with bullets and bannings. The very principles of nonviolence you had espoused and painstakingly implemented seemed to offer no answer to a regime that only understood the language of force. The question of how to proceed becomes a matter of intense, agonizing debate within the now illegal ANC. Could nonviolence still work? Or had the time come to meet force with force, You find yourself arguing passionately for a shift in strategy. It's not a decision taken lightly. It means abandoning a deeply held principle, a path you had personally championed for years. But the alternative, it seems, is to watch the movement be slowly and brutally crushed into oblivion. Historians still argue whether the ANC's decision to launch an armed struggle was an inevitable response to relentless state violence and the closure of all peaceful avenues, or if other, perhaps more creative, forms of non-violent mass action could have been further explored and exhausted, even in the face of such extreme repression. Ultimately, the argument for an armed component to the struggle prevails. It is decided that the ANC will create a military wing, separate from its political structure, to carry out acts of sabotage against symbols of apartheid and government infrastructure. This new organization is named Umkhonto we Sizwe MK, meaning Spear of the Nation. You are instrumental in its formation and become its first commander-in-chief. This is a profound transformation from lawyer and political leader to the head of an underground army. MK is formally launched on December 16, 1961. The date is highly symbolic. It is Dingaan's Day, later Day of the Covenant, then Day of Reconciliation, a sacred day for Afrikaner nationalism, commemorating a Boer victory over the Zulu army in 1838. The choice of this date for MK's first operations, a series of coordinated sabotage attacks on government buildings and electrical installations in Johannesburg, Port Elizabeth, and Durban, is a deliberate act of reappropriation, a signal that the oppressed are now fighting back. The initial strategy of MK is carefully calibrated. It focuses on sabotage against hard targets, government offices, power lines, transport links. The aim is to damage the infrastructure of apartheid and to deliver a psychological blow to the white minority's sense of security, all while, critically, trying to avoid loss of life. MK's early motto was basically, "We're here to break your symbols of oppression, not your bones, unless you're a particularly stubborn power pylon that refuses to cooperate." This distinction between sabotage and terrorism targeting civilians is crucial for the ANC's moral standing, both domestically and internationally. The path of armed struggle is a perilous one, filled with immense risks and moral complexities. But you and your comrades feel that the intransigence and brutality of the apartheid state have left you with no other honorable choice. The troublemaker, the defiant volunteer, is now a guerrilla leader. The decision to form Umkhonto we Sizwe MK and your appointment as its first commander-in-chief thrusts you into a new, clandestine world. Life underground is a taxing existence of constant vigilance, moving from one safe house to another, often in disguise. You become known as the Black Pimpernel for your ability to evade the increasingly desperate police manhunt. Your disguises, perhaps as a chauffeur or a chef, were apparently quite effective for a time, though one imagines it's hard to stay completely incognito when you're over 6 feet tall and radiating those future president vibes even in overalls. This period is one of immense pressure, organizing MK's nascent structures, establishing communication lines, and trying to build a disciplined force capable of carrying out its mission of sabotage, all while separated from your family and comrades. In early 1962, you undertake a perilous journey, slipping out of South Africa to tour various African nations. Your mission is multifaceted to garner political support for the ANC and MK, to secure funding and resources for the armed struggle, and to arrange military training for MK cadres. you address the Pan-African Freedom Movement Conference in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, bringing the South African struggle to a continental stage. You meet with leaders like Julius Nyerere of Tanganyika and Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, receiving military instruction yourself in Algeria and Ethiopia. This trip significantly raises your international profile and solidifies your image as a leading figure in the fight against apartheid. Despite the enormous risks, you decide to return to South Africa in July 1962. You believe your place is with your people, leading the struggle from within. However, on August 5, 1962, your luck runs out. While traveling by car, disguised as a chauffeur, you are apprehended at a police roadblock near Howick in Natal. The exact circumstances of your capture have long been a subject of speculation, with some suggesting a possible tip-off, perhaps even involving foreign intelligence agencies, though definitive proof remains elusive. You are quickly brought to trial, not yet for your MK activities, which the state is still piecing together, but on charges of inciting workers to strike stemming from the 1961 stay-at-home protest and leaving the country illegally. You decide to conduct your own defense, appearing in court in traditional Thembu Karas. You use the trial not to plead for mercy, but to challenge the legitimacy of a legal system that serves only the white minority. You declare that you feel neither morally nor legally obliged to obey laws made by a parliament in which you have no representation. Your bold stance earns you a sentence of 5 years imprisonment with hard labor. While you are serving this sentence, the apartheid regime scores a devastating blow against MK and the ANC. On July 11, 1963, police raid Lily's Leaf Farm in Rivonia, a northern suburb of Johannesburg, which had served as a secret headquarters and safe house for the MK High Command. They capture a swathe of top ANC and MK leaders, including Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, Ahmed Kathrada, Raymond Malaba, Dennis Goldberg, and others. Crucially, the police also seize a trove of documents, including Operation Mayabuye, a detailed plan for guerrilla warfare. The police finding Operation Mayabuye at Lily's Leaf was the apartheid regime's equivalent of stumbling upon the rebel alliance's fully detailed Death Star plans. It was a catastrophic intelligence failure for the movement. The state now believes it has the evidence to crush the leadership of the armed struggle for good. You are brought from prison to join your captured comrades as accused number 1 in what will become known as the Rivonia Trial, which officially begins in October 1963 in Pretoria. The charges are dire sabotage, for which there was a new law imposing a minimum 5-year sentence and a maximum of death, conspiracy to overthrow the state by means of revolution, and furthering the objects of communism. The prosecution, led by the formidable Dr. Percy Utar, paints you and your fellow accused as dangerous terrorists bent on violent revolution with foreign assistance. The death penalty looms large over all of you. Facing a potential death sentence really focuses the mind. Suddenly, that 5-year sentence for your earlier unauthorized holiday abroad probably looked like a comparatively relaxing spa weekend. Your legal team is exceptional, headed by Bram Fisher, an Afrikaner advocate of impeccable establishment credentials who is secretly a communist and a deep supporter of the ANC. His decision to lead the defense, knowing the personal and professional cost, is an act of extraordinary courage. He is assisted by Joel Joff, George Bizos, a close friend of yours from university days, and Arthur Chaskelson, understanding that the evidence against many of them, particularly concerning MK's activities, is overwhelming. You and your co-accused make a crucial strategic decision. This trial will not primarily be about pleading innocence in a legalistic sense. Instead, it will be a political trial, an opportunity to explain to South Africa and the world why you turned to armed struggle, to articulate the ANC's vision, and to expose the brutality of apartheid. It's less a defense against charges and more a defiant manifesto from the dock. On April 20th, 1964, as the defense case opens, you deliver a statement from the dock. Because you are an accused, not a witness, you cannot be cross-examined on this statement. You speak for nearly 3 hours. Calmly and methodically, you trace the history of the ANC's struggle, its decades of commitment to peaceful, constitutional means. You detail the escalating government repression, the violence meted out against unarmed protesters, citing the Sharpeville massacre as a key turning point when, as you put it, the government had resorted to a show of force to crush opposition to its policies. You explain the careful, reluctant decision to form Umkhonto we Sizwe, emphasizing that its initial policy was to target symbols of apartheid, like pass offices and power installations, and to avoid loss of life, a stark contrast to indiscriminate terrorism. You articulate the ANC's vision of a non-racial democratic South Africa, where all people would live in harmony with equal opportunities. Your speech culminates in an unforgettable peroration, words that will echo through history. During my lifetime, I have dedicated myself to this struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve, but if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. The courtroom is silent, the impact profound. These weren't just words, they were a testament of unwavering commitment, a declaration that some ideals are worth the ultimate sacrifice. The trial grinds on for months. International pressure mounts, with calls from the United Nations and governments around the world for clemency. Finally, on June 11, 1964, Judge Quartus DeWitt delivers his verdict, guilty on most charges for you and 7 of your co-accused. The next day, June 12, 1964, is sentencing. The expectation is death, but then, the sentence life imprisonment. One mainstream historical fact is that the Rivonia Trial concluded on June 12, 1964, with Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, Raymond Malaba, Elias Motsoaledi, Andrew Malangeni, Ahmed Kathrada, and Dennis Goldberg being sentenced to life imprisonment. Historians still argue whether the immense international pressure and widespread condemnation of apartheid played the decisive role in Judge DeWitt's decision to impose life sentences instead of the death penalty, or if his judgment was primarily based on the nuances of South African law at the time and his own judicial discretion. Whatever the specific reasons, your life and the lives of your comrades are spared, but the price is a living death, condemned to the notorious prison on Robben Island. The sentence of life imprisonment, handed down at the Rivonia Trial, means you and your comrades, Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, Ahmed Kathrada, and the others, are transported to South Africa's most notorious penitentiary, Robben Island. This small, wind-swept piece of land lies about 7 miles off the coast of Cape Town, a place of bleak isolation that had served as a leper colony, a mental institution, and now a maximum security prison for political opponents of the apartheid regime. Robben Island wasn't on any tourist brochures, unless they were advertising bleak despair with ocean views. No escape likely. The ferry ride across the choppy, cold Atlantic waters is a grim passage, each wave taking you further from the world you knew, towards an existence designed to break your spirit. Upon arrival, you are met with the harsh reality of prison life. The warders, mostly white Afrikaners, often poorly educated and deeply indoctrinated with racist ideology, greet you with taunts and aggression. You are stripped of your civilian clothes, your name replaced with a prison number. You become 466664. You are assigned to B section, the single-story block reserved for political prisoners, a stark, gray quadrangle of concrete and iron bars. Your cell is tiny, perhaps 7 by 7 feet, damp from the sea air. There's no bed, just a thin sisal mat on the cold stone floor and a couple of threadbare blankets. A bucket in the corner serves as your toilet. For 18 years, this will be your world. Daily life is a grueling routine of deprivation and hard labor. The food is meager and racially discriminatory. As an African prisoner, you receive smaller rations and a poorer diet than colored or Indian prisoners. The prison diet wasn't exactly Michelin star, more like mystery star. You'd often wonder if the main ingredient was punishment itself. The highlight of the day for the authorities is the forced labor in the lime quarry. For years, you and your fellow prisoners toil under the glaring sun, chipping away at the limestone with pickaxes and shovels. The work is physically exhausting. The dust irritates your lungs, and the relentless glare from the white rock permanently damages your eyesight. Breaking rocks in the lime quarry, the ultimate terrible team-building exercise, with a guaranteed lifetime membership if you complained too loudly. The purpose of this labor isn't productivity. It's to crush your will, to reduce you to a state of mindless exhaustion. Discipline is arbitrary and brutal. The warders enforce a litany of petty rules, and punishments for minor infractions can be severe. Solitary confinement in a dark, bare cell, deprivation of meals, or physical abuse. Communication with the outside world is almost entirely severed. Visits from family are infrequent, brief, and conducted through a thick glass screen with no physical contact allowed. Letters are heavily censored, with large portions blacked out by the prison authorities, and often delayed for months or simply never delivered. Getting a letter was like trying to decipher ancient hieroglyphics after the censors had used most of it for target practice with their black markers. News from the outside, especially political news, is forbidden. You are, in effect, buried alive. Yet, even in this desolate environment, your spirit, and the collective spirit of the political prisoners, refuses to be extinguished. You and your comrades begin to organize to resist the dehumanizing regime in subtle and overt ways. You establish routines to maintain your physical and mental well-being. You exercise in the cramped courtyard, devise ways to communicate secretly, and, most importantly, you turn the prison into a center of learning. Robben Island becomes known as the University, or Nelson Mandela University. Prisoners with education share their knowledge, teaching others literacy, history, economics, political theory, and languages. You yourself undertake a Bachelor of Laws LLB degree through correspondence with the University of London, studying late into the night in your tiny cell after a long day in the quarry. Robben Island became the most exclusive and arguably toughest correspondence university in the world, where your student debt was paid in years of your life. The ANC's organizational structure is replicated within the prison walls. There is a high organ or leadership committee, of which you are a key member, that makes decisions, resolves disputes, and represents the prisoners in their dealings with the authorities. Political debates continue, strategies for the future are discussed, and the commitment to the struggle is reaffirmed. Small acts of defiance become vital affirmations of dignity, complaining about the food, demanding better conditions, refusing to show undue deference to the warders. There are hunger strikes, work stoppages, and constant petitions for improvements. One of the earliest and most symbolic struggles is the fight for long trousers. African prisoners are issued shorts, a degrading symbol of juvenile status, while colored and Indian prisoners receive long trousers. It takes years of persistent protest before this discriminatory practice is abolished. Your leadership qualities, honed through years of political activism and the crucible of the Rivonia Trial, naturally come to the fore. You become a spokesman for the prisoners, a calm and rational negotiator with the often hostile prison authorities. You possess an ability to connect with people, even your jailers, to argue your case with logic and dignity. You earn the respect not only of your fellow prisoners, but, grudgingly, of some of the warders too. Your innate authority, your refusal to be cowed, and your unwavering commitment to your principles make you a powerful moral force. A mainstream historical fact is that Nelson Mandela was imprisoned on Robben Island from 1964 to 1982. 18 long, arduous years. The sheer length of time is difficult to comprehend. Seasons change, years pass, the world outside transforms. But your reality remains the gray stone and the relentless routine of Robben Island. There are moments of deep despair, of loneliness, of profound anxiety about your wife, Winnie, and your children, from whom you are almost entirely cut off. Yet, through it all, you and your comrades maintain an unbreakable will. You find strength in solidarity, in shared purpose, and even in humor. You learn to master your emotions, to project an aura of calm and control, even when inwardly you might be suffering. Historians still argue whether the primary factor that prevented the complete psychological crushing of political prisoners on Robben Island was their own incredible internal resilience, their sophisticated political organization, and their commitment to education and mutual support, or if it was the eventual and very gradual, often begrudging improvements in conditions brought about by sustained external pressure from international organizations and changing attitudes within some sections of the prison service itself over the long decades. The truth likely lies in a combination of these factors, but the unwavering spirit of men like yourself was undoubtedly the core of that resistance. You are determined that Robben Island will not be the graveyard of your hopes, but a crucible that forges an even stronger resolve to achieve the freedom for which you have already sacrificed so much. While you endure the monotonous grind and calculated cruelties of Robben Island, a different kind of existence is taking shape for you on the world stage. The South African government's intention in sentencing you and your Rivonia comrades to life imprisonment was not just to remove you physically, but to erase you from public consciousness, to make you forgotten men. Inside South Africa, your name cannot be legally quoted. Your image cannot be published. You are intended to be a non-person, a footnote in a history that the apartheid regime is determined to write on its own terms. But they miscalculate, quite spectacularly. It's like trying to put out a wildfire with a teacup of water. Their attempts at suppression only make your symbolic flame burn brighter. You were basically the world's most famous invisible man for a while. Everyone knew your name, but the South African government pretended you were just a filing error in a very secure, very remote cabinet. The ANC in exile, under the steadfast leadership of your old friend and comrade Oliver Tambo, plays a crucial role in this. Tambo, operating from London and Lusaka, becomes the de facto president of the ANC and its chief international diplomat. He tirelessly travels the globe, meeting with governments, addressing the United Nations, and coordinating the efforts of the burgeoning international anti-apartheid movement, AAM. He ensures that the world does not forget the plight of political prisoners in South Africa, and increasingly, your name becomes synonymous with that plight. Across the world, grassroots AAMs gain momentum throughout the 1970s and explode in the 1980s. Ordinary citizens in countries like Britain, the Netherlands, the Scandinavian nations, Canada, and eventually the United States are moved to action. They organize consumer boycotts of South African products. Those outspan oranges became a particularly potent symbol of apartheid fruit. They campaign for sporting boycotts, leading to South Africa's increasing isolation from international competitions like the Olympics, cricket tours, and rugby matches. For a sports-mad nation like white South Africa, this isolation cuts deep. South Africa's rugby team, the Springboks, suddenly found their international dance card emptier than a philosopher's wallet. It turns out, global opinion can tackle harder than any forward. Cultural and academic boycotts also gain traction, with artists, musicians, and academics urged not to perform in or collaborate with apartheid South Africa. Perhaps most significantly, these movements begin to lobby for economic sanctions and disinvestment. They pressure multinational corporations to pull their investments out of South Africa and urge their own governments to impose comprehensive sanctions. This campaign builds slowly but inexorably, targeting banks, oil companies, and other businesses propping up the apartheid economy. Central to all this global activity is the Free Nelson Mandela campaign. Your image, often a somewhat dated photograph from before your imprisonment, or stylized graphic representations, becomes an instantly recognizable symbol of resistance. Your words from the Rivonia Trial, especially that powerful closing statement about being prepared to die for the ideal of a democratic and free society, are widely circulated, resonating with people fighting for justice everywhere. Posters emblazoned with your face and the simple, powerful slogan, "Free Nelson Mandela," appear on university campuses, in church halls, and at street demonstrations across the globe. Badges are worn, petitions are signed, and songs are written in your honor. While you are breaking rocks in the lime quarry on Robben Island, unaware of the specifics of this global mobilization, you are becoming an icon. A mainstream historical fact is that the Free Nelson Mandela campaign became a global phenomenon in the 1980s, culminating in events like the Nelson Mandela 70th birthday tribute concert at Wembley Stadium in London on June 11, 1988. This star-studded concert, featuring artists like Stevie Wonder, Whitney Houston, Sting, and Dire Straits, was broadcast to an estimated 600 million people in over 60 countries, massively amplifying the call for your release and bringing the anti-apartheid message into living rooms worldwide. Inside South Africa, despite facing her own relentless persecution, including bannings, imprisonment, and internal exile to the remote town of Brandfort, your wife, Winnie Madikizela Mandela, plays a crucial, if later controversial, role in keeping your name and spirit alive. For many years, she is the most visible symbol of resistance within the country, enduring harassment and brutality, but refusing to be silenced. Winnie Mandela was keeping your name alive with more tenacity than a telemarketer during dinner time and facing far more dangerous opposition from the security police. She becomes known to many as the Mother of the Nation, a defiant figure who reminds South Africa and the world of your continued existence. Events within South Africa also fuel the international outcry. The Soweto uprising of June 1976, when thousands of schoolchildren protesting against the imposition of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction are met with bullets from the police, leading to hundreds of deaths, horrifies the world. The images of dying children, like Hector Peterson, galvanize a new generation of young Black South Africans into active resistance and further strengthen the resolve of the international AAM. Each act of brutality by the apartheid regime only serves to highlight the injustice of your continued imprisonment. The United Nations passes numerous resolutions condemning apartheid and calling for your release. Heads of state, religious leaders like Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who coins the term Rainbow Nation, and prominent international figures add their voices to the chorus. A strange paradox develops the more the South African government tries to isolate you and crush your influence, the more your symbolic power grows internationally. You are the unseen prisoner whose shadow looms ever larger over the apartheid state. Historians still argue whether the international anti-apartheid movement's intense focus on Nelson Mandela as an individual icon inadvertently overshadowed the collective nature of the struggle and the vital contributions of other crucial leaders, grassroots activists, and ordinary people within South Africa. Or if this strategic personification of the struggle around a single compelling figure was, in fact, a necessary and highly effective strategy for achieving mass mobilization and global sympathy. Regardless of the academic debate, your image, your story, and your unbroken will behind prison walls become a potent weapon against the very system that seeks to destroy you. As your image and name become a global rallying cry for freedom throughout the 1980s, and as the anti-apartheid movement callback to Section 8 tightens its grip on the South African economy and its international standing, subtle shifts begin to occur within the seemingly monolithic structure of the apartheid state. The country is becoming increasingly ungovernable. Townships are in open revolt, rent boycotts are widespread, and new mass democratic formations like the United Democratic Front UDF and the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU, mobilize hundreds of thousands in disciplined resistance. The government, now led by the hard-nosed PW, Botha, responds with intensified repression, including successive states of emergency. But an undeniable realization is dawning in some Afrikaner intellectual and business circles: apartheid, in its current form, is a dead end. The communist threat, long used as a bogeyman to justify repression and gain Western support, is also diminishing as the Cold War begins to thaw. It's within this volatile and slowly changing context that the first tentative, almost imperceptible feelers are extended from the government towards you, its most famous and symbolic prisoner. In 1982, after 18 brutal years on Robben Island, you and your close comrades, Walter Sisulu, Ahmed Kathrada, Raymond Malaba, and Andrew Mlangeni, are abruptly transferred to Pollsmoor Prison, a large, modern facility on the mainland near Cape Town. Physically, the conditions are an improvement over the primitive austerity of the island. You have beds, slightly better food, and more access to news. However, you are also more isolated from the general prison population and the highly organized political structures you helped build on Robben Island. Then, In 1988, after a serious bout of tuberculosis that necessitates hospitalization, you are moved again, this time alone, to a warder's house within the grounds of Victor Verster Prison, near Paarl in the Cape Winelands. The move to Victor Verster was quite an upgrade in terms of creature comforts. Instead of a tiny cell with a shared bucket, you now had a cottage with a swimming pool and your own cook, a fellow prisoner. It wasn't exactly a luxury penthouse suite, more like a gilded cage with slightly better catering than Robben Island. And your warden was essentially still your jailer, just one who might offer you a cup of tea before locking the gates. This unique setup, however, provides a more conducive and discreet environment for what is to come. Throughout the mid-1980s, President P.W. Botha makes several public conditional offers of release. The conditions usually revolve around you renouncing violence and, by implication, the armed struggle waged by Umkhonto we Sizwe. Each time, you steadfastly refuse. Your most famous rejection comes in February 1985, when your daughter Zinzi reads your statement to a massive rally in Soweto. In it, you declare, "What freedom am I being offered while the organization of the people remains banned? What freedom am I being offered when I may be arrested on a pass offense? I cannot and will not give any undertaking at a time when I and you, the people, are not free. Your freedom and mine cannot be separated. The government kept offering you freedom if you just behave and denounce the struggle. It was rather like offering a caged lion a biscuit if it promised to transform into a docile house cat. Behind the scenes, however, you make a momentous and, at the time, deeply controversial decision to initiate contact with the government yourself, without prior consultation with the ANC leadership in exile in Lusaka, a high-risk move that could be misinterpreted by your own comrades. You decide that the deadlock must be broken, that even enemies must eventually talk if a solution is to be found. One mainstream historical fact is that Nelson Mandela initiated secret talks with representatives of the apartheid government from prison, beginning around 1985 to 1986, initially with Minister of Justice Kobe Coetzee. These initial meetings with Coetzee are cautious, probing affairs. You are sizing each other up, testing the waters. Slowly, a degree of mutual, if wary, respect begins to form. You find Coetzee to be a relatively pragmatic individual, someone with whom you can at least reason. These discussions gradually expand to include a secret working group of senior government officials, including Neil Barnard, the formidable head of the National Intelligence Service, and Fani van der Merwe, Director General of Prisons. The talks cover the fundamental obstacles to any negotiated settlement: the ANC's commitment to armed struggle, its alliance with the South African Communist Party, the government's insistence on group rights seen by the ANC as a veiled attempt to maintain white privilege, and the ANC's demand for one person, one vote in a unitary state. The risks you are taking are immense. There's the danger of alienating your comrades in the ANC who might see these secret talks as a betrayal or a sign of weakening resolve. Communicating your motives and the substance of the discussions to Lusaka is fraught with difficulty and delay. On the government side, there are powerful hardliners who vehemently oppose any negotiation with what they consider a terrorist organization. Botha himself is an unpredictable and often intransigent figure. His infamous Rubicon speech in 1985, where he was expected to announce significant reforms but instead delivered a defiant tirade, had dashed many hopes call back to general 1980s context. You meticulously prepare a document for P.W., Botha, laying out your arguments for why the government must negotiate directly with the unbanned ANC to achieve a lasting peace. Finally, in July 1989, you are taken for a secret meeting with President Botha himself at Tuynhuys, his official residence in Cape Town. It's a remarkable moment, the long-imprisoned leader of the banned liberation movement, face to face with the iron-willed president of the apartheid state. The meeting is polite, even cordial, but ultimately symbolic rather than substantive. Botha, the Groot crocodile, Great Crocodile as he was known, is not yet ready to make the fundamental shifts required. Botha must have been like a very polite, very tense tea party with a dinosaur who wasn't quite ready to admit his entire species and its worldview was facing imminent extinction. Despite the lack of immediate breakthroughs with Botha, these clandestine negotiations, initiated and patiently nurtured by you from within your prison walls, are profoundly important. They represent the first cracks in the wall of granite that apartheid seemed to be. They begin a process of humanizing the enemy on both sides and exploring, however tentatively, the potential for a negotiated future. Historians still argue whether your decision to initiate secret talks with the apartheid government without the initial full mandate of the ANC in exile was a masterstroke of pragmatic leadership that astutely recognized a shifting balance of forces and broke the political deadlock, or a high-risk, unilateral gamble that could have potentially compromised the movement's united front and negotiating position had it gone awry. What is certain is that these talks planted the seeds of change, seeds that would soon begin to sprout in the most unexpected ways. The secret talks you initiated from your prison cell call back to Section 9. Those tentative feelers for a negotiated future begin to gain momentum against a backdrop of significant political upheaval. In January 1989, Botha, the Groot crocodile, suffers a debilitating stroke. This event triggers a power struggle within the ruling National Party, leading to his reluctant resignation. He is replaced by F.W. de Klerk, first as party leader in February and then as state president in September 1989. De Klerk is widely regarded as a conservative, a party man through and through, and few expect him to be the agent of radical change. However, he is also a pragmatist, more attuned than Botha to the dire economic situation caused by sanctions, the escalating internal unrest, and the shifting international landscape, particularly the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe, which pulls the rug out from under the apartheid regime's claim to be a bastion against a global communist onslaught. De Klerk's government continues the dialogue with you, now with greater urgency and purpose. He and his key ministers realize that the status quo is untenable and that you, Nelson Mandela, hold the key to any peaceful transition. Then, on February 2, 1990, F.W. de Klerk stands before the white-dominated South African parliament and delivers a speech that electrifies the nation and astonishes the world. When de Klerk made that speech, jaws dropped so hard across South Africa, they probably registered on seismographs. It was like the Pope suddenly announcing he was taking up professional wrestling, a complete game changer. He announces the immediate unbanning of the African National Congress, the Pan-Africanist Congress, the South African Communist Party, and numerous other restricted organizations. He declares a moratorium on executions and announces the release of many political prisoners. Most significantly, he signals the government's commitment to enter into negotiations for a new, democratic constitution. The world holds its breath. Your release is imminent. The days leading up to it are filled with intense, behind-the-scenes negotiations. The government initially favors a quiet, low-key release to avoid mass demonstrations. The ANC, and indeed you yourself, insist on a public, dignified departure. You are determined to walk out of prison a free man, not released on parole or under restrictive conditions. After 27 years, 6 months, and a few days in captivity, a lifetime stolen, you are not about to compromise on the terms of your freedom. And then, the day arrives, Sunday, February 11th, 1990. A mainstream historical fact that became an iconic moment of the 20th century is this: Nelson Mandela was released from Victor Verster prison on February 11th, 1990. The world's media has descended on the gates of the prison. Thousands of joyous supporters have gathered, singing, dancing, waving ANC flags. In the late afternoon, the gates swing open, and you emerge, walking hand in hand with your wife, Winnie Madikizela Mandela. You raise a clenched fist salute. You are 71 years old, a little stooped perhaps, your hair grayed, but your presence is commanding, your dignity palpable. After all those years, you probably instinctively checked your pockets for a passbook out of sheer habit before remembering you were one of the key figures who consigned them to the dustbin of history. The initial moments are a chaotic blur. The designated car is not immediately where it should be, and you are momentarily engulfed by the sheer press of media and well-wishers. But then you are whisked away, beginning a slow, tumultuous journey towards Cape Town. The roads are lined with ecstatic crowds, a human sea celebrating this almost unbelievable moment. The crowds were so huge, it probably felt like the entire population of South Africa had decided to meet you personally at the prison gate. Traffic jams must have been truly epic that day. Your destination is the Cape Town City Hall, overlooking the Grand Parade, where a massive, expectant crowd has been waiting for hours. You step out onto the balcony, the same balcony from which British royals had addressed colonial subjects in bygone eras, to deliver your first public speech in nearly 3 decades. Your voice, perhaps a little rusty after so long, rings out with clarity and force. You salute the people. You salute your comrades in the ANC. You acknowledge the role of F.W. de Klerk in taking the courageous decision to release you and unban the organizations. But you make it clear that this is not the end of the struggle. I stand here before you not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people. You declare, your tireless and heroic sacrifices have made it possible for me to be here today. I therefore place the remaining years of my life in your hands. You call for discipline and continued action to dismantle the remaining pillars of apartheid. Giving your first speech after 27 years of enforced silence must have been like uncorking a very, very well-aged bottle of revolutionary rhetoric, potent stuff. Indeed, your release is not just an end to your personal ordeal. It marks the beginning of the long walk to freedom for the entire nation, a path fraught with immense challenges. The expectations placed upon your shoulders are monumental. You are seen by millions as a messiah, a figure who can single-handedly deliver peace and prosperity. Managing these expectations is a daunting task. The country is teetering on the brink, a cauldron of hope, fear, and simmering violence. A shadowy third force, widely believed to have links to elements within the state security apparatus, is actively working to destabilize the transition, fomenting violence, particularly between supporters of the ANC and Mangosuthu Buthelezis Inkatha Freedom Party IFP. Thousands will die in this internecine conflict in the years ahead. Internally, the ANC itself needs to be rebuilt within South Africa, integrating the exiled leadership returning from Lusaka, the UDF activists who had bravely carried the struggle on the ground, and the Robben Island veterans like yourself. Forging a united front and a coherent strategy for the upcoming negotiations is paramount. On a personal level, you face the challenge of readjusting to a world that has changed almost beyond recognition since you were imprisoned in 1962. You have to reconnect with your family, particularly your children, who have grown up without you. And you have to navigate the blinding glare of global superstardom. Going from the enforced solitude of a prison cell to being the most famous man on the planet overnight is a bigger adjustment than most self-help books or reality TV shows could ever prepare someone for. Almost immediately, you and de Klerk begin the formal process of dialogue. In May 1990, the Groot Schuur Minute is signed, in which the ANC and the government commit to resolving the existing climate of violence and intimidation, and to removing obstacles to negotiation. This is the first crucial step on the tortuous road to a democratic South Africa. Historians still argue whether F.W. de Klerk's decision to unban the ANC and release Nelson Mandela was primarily motivated by a genuine change of heart and a moral recognition of apartheid's inherent evils, or by a cold, pragmatic calculation that the National Party could better manage and influence the inevitable transition by taking the initiative when it did, thereby hoping to secure a more favorable outcome for the white minority. The truth, as is often the case, is likely a complex mixture of both, but the courage he displayed cannot be denied, nor can the monumental hope that your freedom ignited across a deeply wounded land. The euphoria that greeted your release from Victor Verster callback to Section 10 is intoxicating, a wave of hope washing over a nation desperate for change. But beneath the celebrations, South Africa remains a tinderbox. Decades of enforced separation, institutionalized racism, and state-sponsored violence have left deep wounds. The path from your prison cell to a truly democratic nation is not a straight line, but a treacherous, winding road, pocked with potential ambushes and sudden precipices. You and F. de Klerk, leaders of formerly implacable foes, now find yourselves yoked together, trying to steer the country towards a new dawn while powerful forces seek to drag it back into darkness or ignite a racial civil war. You and de Klerk were like two captains trying to steer a massive, leaky ship through a hurricane, occasionally arguing over who had the better map, and all while saboteurs were drilling holes below deck. The first steps involve clearing the path for genuine negotiations. The Groot Schuur Minute in May 1990 and the Pretoria Minute in August 1990 see the government agree to release more political prisoners and review security legislation, while the ANC, in a hugely significant concession, agrees to suspend the armed struggle waged by Umkhonto we Sizwe. These are crucial trust-building exercises, laying a tentative foundation for the far more complex talks to come. The main negotiating forum, the Convention for a Democratic South Africa, CODESA, eventually gets underway in December 1991 at the World Trade Center in Kempton Park, near Johannesburg. A mainstream historical fact is that CODESA began in December 1991, bringing together 19 political parties and organizations to thrash out the framework for a new South Africa. Codice had so many political parties, each with its own agenda. It must have felt like trying to herd cats during an earthquake. While they're all arguing about the best brand of catnip for the post-negotiation party, you lead the ANC delegation, while de Klerk heads the National Party government team. The core issues are monumental: how to draft a new, non-racial constitution, what an interim government would look like, how to ensure free and fair elections, and how to deal with the legacy of apartheid. The talks are incredibly tense. The National Party, fearing the loss of white privilege and power, pushes hard for various forms of power sharing that would effectively give the white minority a veto over key decisions. Their initial ideas for power sharing sounded suspiciously like, we still get to be in charge, just a bit more quietly and with more complicated flowcharts. The ANC, on the other hand, insists on a straightforward transition to majority rule in a unitary state with a strong Bill of Rights to protect all citizens. Clashes are frequent, deadlines are missed, and walkouts are threatened. Complicating everything is the horrific wave of political violence sweeping the country. Hostels for migrant workers become battlegrounds between ANC and Inkatha Freedom Party IFP supporters. Massacres in townships become horrifyingly common. There is widespread suspicion and growing evidence of a third force, shadowy elements within the state security apparatus, deliberately fomenting this violence to derail the negotiations and prove that black majority rule would lead to chaos. Historians still argue whether the level of political violence during the 1990-1994 transition was primarily orchestrated by a third force within the state aiming to derail negotiations, or if it was predominantly a result of genuine and tragic political rivalries between the ANC and IFP that spiraled out of control, fanned by fear and misinformation. Whatever the primary cause, the bloodshed creates an atmosphere of extreme crisis and puts immense pressure on you and other leaders. Codice. I collapses in May 1992 amidst disagreements and the escalating violence. The Boipatong massacre in June 1992, where Inkatha supporting hostile dwellers slaughter over 40 residents of Boipatong Township with allegations of police collusion, forces the ANC to temporarily suspend bilateral talks with the government. You are under enormous pressure from your grassroots supporters who feel the ANC is conceding too much while their people are being killed. Another tragedy, the Bisho massacre in September 1992, where Ciskei homeland soldiers open fire on ANC marchers, further inflames tensions. Yet, even in these darkest moments, the commitment to finding a negotiated solution, however painful, endures. You and de Klerk meet and, in September 1992, sign a record of understanding, recommitting to the process and agreeing on key measures to curb violence and move forward. This act of leadership pulls the country back from the brink. Negotiations resume under a new banner, the Multi-Party Negotiating Forum (MPNF), in early 1993. Key negotiators like Cyril Ramaphosa for the ANC and Roelf Meyer for the National Party develop a pragmatic working relationship, often finding solutions away from the glare of the main table. Your personal leadership during this period is crucial. You have to balance the anger and impatience of your supporters with the pragmatic need for compromise. You undertake the difficult task of reaching out to former adversaries, including conservative white leaders and Afrikaner cultural groups, seeking to reassure them that they have a place in the new South Africa. You even meet with Mangosuthu Buthelezi, despite the terrible conflict between your respective supporters. Your moral authority, built over decades of struggle, and your time on Robben Island callback gives your words immense weight, both domestically and internationally. Perhaps the most dangerous moment comes on April 10, 1993, with the assassination of Chris Hani. Hani, the popular leader of the South African Communist Party and former chief of staff of MK, is gunned down outside his home by a white right-wing extremist. The nation is plunged into crisis, with widespread outrage and spontaneous protests threatening to erupt into full-scale civil war. It was a terrifying moment. The entire nation held its breath, and it felt like the fragile peace was about to shatter. That night, you addressed the nation on television, a black leader, not yet in government, speaking to a country in turmoil. You appeal for calm and discipline, stating, "Tonight, I am reaching out to every single South African, black and white, from the very depths of my being. A white man, full of prejudice and hate, came to our country and committed a deed so foul that our whole nation now teeters on the brink of disaster. A white woman of Afrikaner origin risked her life so that we may know and bring to justice this assassin." Your calm, authoritative voice is credited with pulling South Africa back from the abyss. Against this backdrop of crisis and brinkmanship, the negotiators finally hammer out an interim constitution in late 1993. It provides for a 5-year government of national unity, where any party gaining a certain percentage of the vote would be entitled to cabinet positions, a crucial compromise to allay minority fears. A Bill of Rights is enshrined, and, critically, a date is set for the country's first ever non-racial, one-person, one-vote democratic elections, April 27, 1994. In December 1993, in recognition of your extraordinary efforts to navigate this perilous transition, you and F.W. de Klerk are jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, sharing a Nobel Peace Prize with the guy who was, until very recently, the head of the government that imprisoned you for 27 years. That's taking the concept of forgive and work with your former adversary to an entirely new, Olympic level of diplomacy and statesmanship. The award is a global acknowledgement of the tortuous, improbable journey towards peace you both have led. The Nobel Peace Prize, awarded to you and F.W. de Klerk in December 1993, callback to Section 11, shines a global spotlight on South Africa's precarious journey towards democracy. But there is little time for celebration. The country is hurtling towards its first ever non-racial election, scheduled for April 27, 1994, and the atmosphere is electric with a volatile mix of hope, excitement, and profound fear. Right-wing white extremist groups, like the Afrikaner Weerstandsbeweging AWB, led by Eugene Terre Blanche, are making increasingly desperate threats of civil war to halt the transition. The violence between ANC and IFP supporters continues to ravage parts of the country, particularly Natal province. The memory of Chris Hani's assassination and the national trauma it induced callback to Section 11 is still fresh. Against this backdrop, massive voter education campaigns are launched across the country. For millions of Black South Africans, this will be their first time participating in a national election. Many are illiterate, and the ballot paper, with its long list of parties, presents a formidable challenge. Explaining a ballot paper with dozens of parties, each with its own symbol, to someone who's never voted before and who might not be able to read, must have been like trying to teach a fish to ride a bicycle, a noble effort requiring immense patience and creativity. You, as the ANC's presidential candidate, embark on a grueling campaign schedule, crisscrossing the country, addressing huge rallies. You are suddenly the nation's most sought-after political rock star. Only your concerts involved impassioned policy speeches and calls for reconciliation instead of guitar solos and pyrotechnics. The ANC's message is one of hope, a better life for all. A major crisis looms as Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezis's Inkatha Freedom Party initially announces it will boycott the election, a move that threatens to make a fair vote impossible in IFP strongholds and plunge Natal into even deeper conflict. Frantic, last-minute negotiations involving local and international mediators, including Kenyan academic Washington Okamu and former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, finally persuade Buthelezi to participate, just a week before polling day. A collective sigh of relief ripples through the nation. The election itself is scheduled over 3 days, from April 26th to April 28th, 1994, later extended to the 29th in some areas due to logistical issues. What unfolds is nothing short of a miracle. Instead of the widely feared chaos and bloodshed, South Africans turn out in their millions, forming long, patient, snaking queues, sometimes miles long, hours before polling stations open. These queues, comprising people of all races standing together, often for the first time in such a shared civic endeavor, become the defining image of the election, a powerful, silent testament to the nation's profound yearning for peace and democracy. Those queues were so long, people probably made new lifelong friends, planned their next holiday, and possibly wrote a short novel or two while waiting to cast their historic vote. On April 27th, you cast your own vote in Olange, near Inanda, in Natal, at a polling station set up near the grave of John Dube, the first president of the ANC. The symbolism is immense. For you, a man who spent 27 years in prison, many of them on Robben Island, dreaming of this day, this simple act of marking a cross on a ballot paper is the culmination of a lifetime of struggle, sacrifice, and unwavering belief in the democratic ideal. After all those years fighting for the right to vote, finally casting it must have felt like scoring the winning goal in the World Cup of Freedom, a deeply personal and overwhelmingly emotional moment. Despite some logistical hitches and isolated incidents, the election is remarkably peaceful and overwhelmingly successful. The turnout is massive. When the votes are finally counted, the ANC achieves a resounding victory, securing 62.65% of the national vote. This gives you a clear mandate, but falls just short of the 2/3 majority required to write the final constitution unilaterally, a result that many, including within the ANC, later see as a blessing in disguise, ensuring a more inclusive and consensual constitution-making process. The National Party, led by de Klerk, comes in second with 20.39%, and the IFP third with 10.54%. De Klerk gracefully concedes defeat, pledging his party's cooperation in the new South Africa. In accordance with the interim constitution, a government of national unity GNU is formed. You, as leader of the majority party, will be president. The ANC is the dominant partner, but the National Party with de Klerk as one of 2 deputy presidents, Thabo Mbeki of the ANC being the other, and the IFP are also allocated cabinet positions based on their share of the vote. Historians still argue whether the government of national unity, while undoubtedly a crucial short-term measure for promoting stability and reconciliation, ultimately hampered the ANC's ability to implement more radical socio-economic transformation in the critical initial years of democracy by binding it to compromises with its former adversaries. Then comes May 10, 1994, Inauguration Day. The setting is the Union Buildings in Pretoria. For decades, the imposing stone citadel of apartheid power. Its amphitheater now filled with tens of thousands of jubilant South Africans and an astonishing array of international dignitaries. The guest list for your inauguration was so diverse. It's a wonder they didn't have to install simultaneous translation headsets for the entire city of Pretoria. Heads of state, royalty, liberation leaders, and celebrities from around the globe, including Fidel Castro, Yasser Arafat, Hillary Clinton and Al Gore, the Duke of Edinburgh, and many others, have come to witness this historic moment. A mainstream historical fact is that South Africa's first non-racial democratic election was held on April 27, 1994, and Nelson Mandela was inaugurated as its first black president on May 10, 1994. You stand before the nation and the world, taking the oath of office as the first democratically elected president of a free South Africa. Your inaugural address is a masterpiece of reconciliation and hope. You speak of a nation finally at peace with itself and the world. We, the people of South Africa, feel fulfilled that humanity has taken us back into its bosom, that we, who were outlaws not so long ago, have today been given the rare privilege to be host to the nations of the world on our own soil. You pay tribute to de Klerk and to all South Africans who have worked for peace. And then, those unforgettable words, never, never and never again shall it be, that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another and suffer the indignity of being the skunk of the world. Let freedom reign. The sun shall never set on so glorious a human achievement. You speak of your vision for a rainbow nation, a term coined by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, where all South Africans, black and white, can live together in harmony. As you conclude, jets of the South African Air Force, once symbols of white minority, might roar overhead in salute, trailing the colors of the new South African flag. It is a moment of profound catharsis, of almost unbelievable triumph over adversity. The long walk has reached a momentous milestone. The joyous celebrations of your inauguration call back to Section 12 eventually subside, and the colossal task of governing a nation scarred by centuries of division and injustice begins. As president of the new South Africa, you inherit a country with soaring hopes, but also crippled by the deep-seated legacies of apartheid, staggering economic inequality, widespread poverty, deeply entrenched racial mistrust, and the collective trauma of decades of state-sponsored brutality. The Rainbow Nation is a beautiful, aspirational vision, but weaving its disparate colors into a cohesive and functional tapestry requires more than just inspiring speeches. You basically had to be the nation's chief therapist, grief counselor, and supreme optimist, all rolled into one very dapper presidential suit, and all while trying to run a country. Your presidency is defined, above all, by an unwavering commitment to national reconciliation. Having spent 27 years as a political prisoner, much of it enduring the harshness of Robben Island callback, you could have emerged a bitter man, bent on retribution. Instead, you choose the path of forgiveness and bridge building, recognizing that a cycle of vengeance would consume the fragile new democracy. You lead by extraordinary personal example. You invite your former jailer from Robben Island to your presidential inauguration. You have tea with Percy Utar, the prosecutor who had argued for the death penalty for you at the Rivonia Trial. You even visit Betsy Verwoerd, the widow of Hendrik Verwoerd, the man considered the primary architect of apartheid. Your Tea Party guest list as president was probably the most awkward, and yet most historically significant in the world. More sugar, Mr. Former state prosecutor who tried to get me hanged. And how are your roses this year, Mrs. Verwoerd? Perhaps one of your most iconic acts of reconciliation comes during the 1995 Rugby World Cup, hosted by South Africa. Rugby, and particularly the Springbok team, had long been a potent symbol of white Afrikaner nationalism and, by extension, apartheid. Many black South Africans loathed the team. Yet, as the predominantly white Springboks advanced through the tournament, you encourage all South Africans to support them. In the final match against New Zealand, you walk onto the Ellis Park field wearing a Springbok jersey with the captain Francois Pienaar's number 6 on the back. When South Africa wins, you present the trophy to Pienaar, a white Afrikaner. The image of you, a black president, in the green and gold jersey, celebrating with the white captain, electrifies the nation and the world. It is a masterstroke of symbolic nation building. When you put on that Springbok jersey, you didn't just become a rugby fan. You basically performed a national unity miracle that would make most saints look like underachievers in the reconciliation department. But symbolic gestures, however powerful, are not enough to heal the deep wounds of the past. A mechanism is needed to confront the truth of the atrocities committed during apartheid, to provide some measure of justice for victims, and to prevent such abuses from ever happening again. This leads to the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC. The dilemma is immense. How does a new democracy reckon with a past filled with torture, assassinations, and systematic oppression without descending into witch hunts or, conversely, simply sweeping the horrors under the carpet? Prosecutions in the style of Nuremberg seemed likely to bog the country down in endless legal battles and could reignite conflict. A blanket amnesty, as seen in some Latin American transitions, might deny victims their right to truth and acknowledgement. The Promotion of National Unity and Reconciliation Act is passed in 1995, establishing the TRC. A mainstream historical fact is that the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, was established in 1995, chaired by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, to help deal with the human rights violations of the apartheid era. Its mandate is threefold: to investigate gross human rights violations committed between 1960 and 1994 by all sides, including the liberation movements; to provide a platform for victims to share their stories in public hearings, thereby restoring their dignity and ensuring their experiences are officially recorded; and, controversially, to grant amnesty to perpetrators who made full disclosure of politically motivated crimes. The TRC was never meant to be a court of law focused on punishment, but a forum for truth-telling and, hopefully, a step towards healing. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, with his irrepressible spirit, moral authority, and profound compassion, is appointed to chair the TRC. The public hearings, often televised, become a national catharsis and a national agony. For months, South Africans listen as victims recount harrowing tales of loss, torture, and abduction. They also hear perpetrators, including former police officers and soldiers, confess to appalling crimes in exchange for amnesty. The TRC hearings were so emotionally raw They probably should have come with a government-issued box of tissues for everyone watching at home, alongside a national helpline for collective grief. The process is incredibly painful, forcing the nation to look into the abyss of its recent past. The amnesty provision is the most contentious aspect for many victims and their families. The idea that those who committed horrific crimes could walk free simply by telling the truth is a bitter pill to swallow. Justice, in the punitive sense, often seems absent. However, the TRC argues that without the incentive of amnesty, much of the truth about past atrocities would have remained buried forever. Historians still argue whether the TRC's emphasis on truth recovery and amnesty for perpetrators, rather than widespread prosecutions, was the most effective long-term strategy for achieving both justice and reconciliation in post-apartheid South Africa, or if it created a culture of impunity that has had lasting negative consequences. Alongside the TRC, your government focuses on other nation-building initiatives. New national symbols are promoted, a new flag, a new national anthem combining Nkosi Sikelel' iAfrika with Die Stem, the old anthem. The Reconstruction and Development Program, RDP, is launched, an ambitious socio-economic policy framework aimed at addressing the massive inequalities in housing, education, healthcare, and basic services. Progress on the RDP is often slower and more challenging than anticipated, hampered by the sheer scale of the need and the complexities of transforming state institutions. After decades of the state actively trying to break the spirit and lives of the majority of its people, you are now faced with the monumental task of not just mending that state, but fundamentally remaking it and healing the nation it had so profoundly broken. Your leadership in these critical early years, your unwavering focus on reconciliation, even when it was unpopular, and your personal embodiment of forgiveness are crucial in steering South Africa away from the abyss and towards a future, however imperfect, based on shared humanity. After a single, momentous term as president, during which you steered South Africa through the treacherous waters of its initial democratic transition and laid the foundations for national reconciliation with efforts like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, callback to Section 13. You make a decision that further solidifies your democratic credentials. In 1999, despite immense popularity and the constitutional possibility of seeking a second term, you choose to step down from the presidency. This voluntary relinquishing of power sets a powerful precedent on a continent where many leaders have clung to office for decades. You hand over the reins to your deputy, Thabo Mbeki, ensuring a smooth and democratic transfer of authority. You basically did the political equivalent of a legendary concert encore, followed by a graceful exit, saying, "My work here as president is done, but the world still needs a fair bit of sorting out, so don't think you've seen the last of me." Your retirement from the presidency, however, is anything but a quiet retreat into obscurity. If anything, your global influence and moral authority, already immense callback to your global icon status during imprisonment, seem to expand further. Freed from the day-to-day constraints of running a country, you embark on a new phase of your life as an elder statesman, a global advocate for peace, health, and human rights. Your idea of retirement seemed to involve more international travel, high-stakes diplomacy, and global fundraising than most people's entire careers. The word relax clearly wasn't in your post-presidency vocabulary, if it was ever there to begin with. One of your most significant post-presidential roles is that of international peacemaker. drawing on your experiences in negotiating South Africa's own transition. You are sought after as a mediator in some of the world's most intractable conflicts. A mainstream historical fact is that Nelson Mandela played a key role as a facilitator in the complex Burundi peace negotiations, a painstaking process which eventually led to the signing of the Arusha Accords in August 2000. This was no easy task. You had to patiently cajole, persuade, and sometimes sternly admonish warring factions, often with deep-seated historical grievances, towards compromise and a shared future. Your immense personal prestige and the moral weight of your own journey lent you an unparalleled ability to bring opposing sides to the table. Another cause that becomes deeply personal and a major focus of your later years is the fight against HIV/AIDS. South Africa was, and continues to be, one of all countries hardest hit by the pandemic. Initially, the South African government under your successor, Thabo Mbeki, faced widespread criticism for its controversial stance of AIDS denialism and its slow response to the crisis. You, however, become an increasingly vocal and powerful advocate for HIV/AIDS awareness, prevention, and treatment. This crusade takes on an even deeper personal urgency when, in January 2005, your own son, Magatho Mandela, dies from an AIDS-related illness. You publicly announce the cause of his death, a courageous act in a society where stigma surrounding the disease was still rife, stating, "Let us give publicity to HIV/AIDS and not hide it, because the only way to make it appear like a normal illness like tuberculosis, like cancer, is always to come out and say somebody has died because of HIV/AIDS. And people will stop regarding it as something extraordinary." It took a while for the message of urgency to fully permeate all levels of society and government. But you became the world's most respected and probably tallest health education ambassador for this cause. The Nelson Mandela Foundation, which you establish, and the 46664 concerts, named after your Robben Island prison number, repurposing a symbol of oppression into one of hope and action, raise global awareness and millions of dollars for HIV/AIDS programs. Your lifelong concern for the well-being of children also continues unabated. The Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, established during your presidency, expands its work, supporting vulnerable children and youth in South Africa. You consistently use your platform to advocate for children's rights globally, reminding world leaders of their responsibilities to the next generation. In 2007, on your 89th birthday, you, along with your wife Graça Machel, whom you married on your 80th birthday in 1998, and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, launch a new initiative called The Elders. This independent group brings together distinguished global leaders such as former U.S. President Jimmy Carter, former UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan, and former Irish President Mary Robinson to use their collective wisdom, experience, and influence to work on some of the world's most pressing problems, including peace, human rights, and sustainable development. Founding the Elders was like creating a global superhero team dedicated to solving the planet's most complex problems. Only instead of capes and super strength, they wielded decades of experience, profound wisdom, and probably some very stern but impeccably polite diplomatic letters. The Elders often engage in quiet diplomacy, offering impartial counsel and support in conflict situations and advocating for ethical leadership. Throughout your post-presidency, you continue to be a voice of conscience on the world stage, occasionally speaking out on international issues, sometimes in ways that challenge powerful governments. Historians still argue whether your post-presidency interventions on sensitive international issues, such as your strong criticism of the 2003 invasion of Iraq, were an appropriate and effective use of your unique moral authority as a global elder statesman, or if they sometimes risked oversimplifying complex geopolitical situations where your direct influence was limited. What is undeniable is that when you spoke, the world listened, even if it didn't always agree. The Nelson Mandela Foundation plays a crucial role in managing your legacy, preserving your archives, and promoting dialogue on critical social issues. There is also the constant challenge of protecting your image from over-commercialization and ensuring that your name remains associated with the values you stood for. As you grow older, your public appearances understandably become rarer. Each glimpse of Madiba, as you are affectionately known, is treasured by South Africans and people around the world. Your journey from political prisoner to president, and then to global elder statesman, is a testament to an extraordinary life dedicated to the service of humanity, a life that continued to inspire long after you left formal office. Your post-presidency years, though filled with tireless work as an elder statesman championing peace, health, and children's rights call back to Section 14, inevitably see you gradually withdraw from the relentless pace of public life. As you advance well into your 80s and then your 90s, your appearances become rarer, each one cherished by a world that has come to see you as Madiba, the affectionate clan name that signifies a beloved father figure, not just for South Africa, but for humanity. The nation, and indeed the global community, begins to brace itself with a sense of profound gratitude and anticipatory grief. For the day, your extraordinary journey on this earth will conclude, after several bouts of illness, courageously borne, that day arrives. A mainstream historical fact that cast a shadow across the globe is this: Nelson Mandela passed away on December 5, 2013, at his home in Houghton, Johannesburg, at the age of 95, surrounded by his family. Then President Jacob Zuma announced your death to the nation in a televised address, stating, "Our nation has lost its greatest son. Our people have lost a father." The news triggers an unprecedented outpouring of grief and tribute, both within South Africa and across every continent. When you passed, the world didn't just mourn. It was like every news channel, every social media feed, simultaneously ran out of other stories. You were that significant a figure, a moral compass for a world often adrift. South Africa enters 10 days of national mourning. People gather spontaneously in the streets, outside your homes in Johannesburg and Qunu, singing freedom songs, lighting candles, leaving flowers and messages, a vibrant, sorrowful testament to the love and respect you commanded. Memorial services are held across the country, culminating in a massive national memorial at Johannesburg's FNB Stadium, attended by nearly 100 world leaders and tens of thousands of ordinary South Africans braving torrential rain. Your body then lies in state at the Union Buildings in Pretoria, where thousands upon thousands file past to pay their last respects. Finally, you are laid to rest in Qunu, the village of your childhood callback to Section 1, fulfilling your wish to return to the rolling hills and familiar landscapes that shaped your early years. Your funeral in Qunu was probably the only event where global heads of state, in their somber suits, had to carefully navigate around respectfully curious cows and local villagers, a truly unique send-off that blended state formality with deeply rooted Xhosa tradition. In the wake of your passing, the world reflects on your monumental legacy. Your primary achievement is, of course, leading South Africa from the brink of civil war to a negotiated, democratic settlement, dismantling apartheid and ushering in an era of non-racial governance. The Madiba magic, that unique combination of charm, steely resolve, humility, strategic acumen, and profound capacity for forgiveness, is credited with making the impossible possible. You became the living embodiment of reconciliation, a global symbol of freedom, moral integrity, and the enduring power of the human spirit to triumph over adversity. The lessons from your life are manifold. The critical importance of perseverance, demonstrated through 27 years of unjust imprisonment, call back to Robben Island. The transformative power of education, which you pursued even in the darkest of cells. The incredible courage required to forgive those who have wronged you most grievously. The absolute necessity of dialogue, even with your staunchest enemies. An unwavering commitment to democratic principles, and the profound understanding that individuals, through principled action, can indeed make a difference in the world. Your influence extends far beyond South Africa's borders. You inspired countless individuals and movements fighting for justice, equality, and human rights around the globe. The United Nations declared your birthday, July 18th, as Nelson Mandela International Day, encouraging people worldwide to dedicate 67 minutes of their time to public service, 1 minute for each year of your own dedicated public service. Mandela Day is a wonderful initiative, 67 minutes of doing good. Though, knowing your boundless energy levels even in your supposed retirement, you probably would have tried to fit 67 hours of intensive, world-changing work into those 67 minutes. Yet, the legacy is also complex. South Africa, the nation you did so much to birth, continues to grapple with immense challenges, persistent poverty, vast socio-economic inequality that still largely follows racial lines, high unemployment, and troubling levels of corruption. Your name and your ideals are constantly invoked in contemporary South African politics, sometimes as a genuine inspiration, other times as a convenient political tool, or as an impossibly high benchmark against which current leaders are judged and found wanting. Even after you were gone, your name became the ultimate political get-out-of-jail-free card for some, or the standard of integrity that highlighted the shortcomings of others. Historians still argue whether South Africa, in the years since your presidency, has fully lived up to the profound ideals of socio-economic justice and non-racialism that you championed with such conviction, or if the negotiated revolution that brought about democracy inevitably led to compromises that unfortunately entrenched existing economic disparities, leaving the promise of a truly equitable society still largely unfulfilled for millions. But what remains undisputed is the sheer scale of your moral achievement and the enduring light of your example. You showed the world that it is possible to emerge from the crucible of suffering, not with a heart full of vengeance, but with a spirit dedicated to building a common future. You taught us that true leadership involves not just power, but wisdom, humility, and an unwavering commitment to serving others. Your long walk to freedom may have ended, but the journey you inspired, the path towards a more just and compassionate world, continues in the hearts and actions of all those who were touched by your extraordinary life. And so, as the story of this remarkable life, a journey from a rural village to the world's stage, from prisoner to president, from freedom fighter to global peacemaker, draws to a close for our evening, we are left with the quiet echo of its profound meaning. The path was arduous, marked by sacrifice and sorrow, yet illuminated by an unyielding belief in the goodness within humanity and the possibility of profound transformation, both for individuals and for nations. Let the imagery of those long, patient queues on election day, the sound of joyous singing as a new flag was raised, the quiet dignity with which a nation chose forgiveness over retribution. Settle gently in your mind. These were not just political events. They were testament to the human spirit's capacity for resilience, for hope, for choosing a different way forward, even when the past cast such a long and painful shadow. Madiba's life reminds us that even the most formidable walls of division can crumble, that even the deepest wounds can begin to heal, if met with courage, with dialogue, and with a persistent, stubborn belief in our shared humanity. As you drift further into your own peaceful state, carry with you not the weight of history, but the lightness of its most inspiring lessons that peace is possible, that reconciliation can triumph, and that each of us, in our own way, can contribute to a world more worthy of the best of what it means to be human. May your dreams be filled with that quiet strength, that gentle hope,